They left her in the woods to vanish, just another secret buried beneath the pines. 10-year-old Mira stood trembling on the dirt trail, the echo of wagon wheels fading into dusk. Her tears were the only sound left in the silence, but as the cold crept in and shadows deepened, something stirred in the mist. A giant black stallion emerged from the trees, scarred, wild, and watching. It didn't belong to anyone. It didn't carry a saddle or fear. And when Mira cried, it stepped forward, stood by her side, and refused to leave. Some say the wilderness takes everything from you. Others know it gives back only to those who are truly lost. The sun was sinking low behind the jagged spine of the mountains, spilling molten light across the grasslands. Every blade of dry sage caught fire for an instant before fading back into the gray of dust. A dirt road cut through the emptiness of Shadow Creek Valley, winding like an old scar through hills the color of rust. Wind rolled over the plains in long, restless sighs, lifting curtains of sand that blurred the horizon. Far off, a two-wheeled wagon rattled, its wooden frame groaning, a back wheel wobbling with each rut in the road. The sound of creaking spokes echoed for miles, the only rhythm in the desolate afternoon. Fences lay broken, their posts rotted halfway away. Ravens wheeled above, their cries thin and harsh against the wide Wyoming sky. Inside the wagon, 10-year-old Mira Dalton sat pressed into the corner, clutching a rag doll whose yarn hair had turned gray with dust. The doll's seams were split along one arm, but Mira held it as though it were still whole. On the front seat, Eli Thorne drove in grim silence. His jaw was rough with gray stubble. His shoulders were narrow but iron-hard from years of labor and bitterness. His voice finally broke through the wind like a whip. "You think you can run your mouth about things you don't understand?" Mira flinched. "I didn't mean to, sir. I just told Mrs. Langley that Mama's bruise looked bad. That's all." The rein snapped against the horse's back. The wagon jerked. Eli's face flushed red with anger. He muttered a curse, then yanked the reins, pulling the wagon to a halt in the middle of the empty road. Dust swirled up around them in a choking cloud. Before Mira could speak again, Eli climbed down, his boots grinding the dirt. He reached back into the wagon and seized her by the arm, rough enough to make her gasp. "Out," he said. "Papa, please." He stopped, his eyes narrowing into slits. "I ain't your papa." With a violent motion, he pulled her down and flung her into the dirt. Mira stumbled, fell hard on her hands, and tasted blood where grit met her tongue. He threw a small canvas bag beside her, a bundle of crumbs, a cracked water flask, and a change of clothes tied together. Then, without another word, Eli climbed back into the wagon. "Maybe the wilderness will teach you manners, girl." The whip cracked. The horse lurched forward. The wheels screamed over the hardpan and threw up a storm of dust. Mira stayed on her knees, frozen, watching the wagon roll away into the dying light. For a moment, she couldn't even breathe. Then, as the sound of creaking wheels grew fainter, something inside her broke loose. Her chest heaved once, twice. Then she began to cry, small and raw, her voice swallowed by the wind. The horizon darkened to the color of tarnished copper. The wind blew harder now, carrying with it the bitter scent of dry sage and burnt grass. She was alone, truly, utterly alone. The temperature dropped as the sun slid lower behind the mountains. A purple haze covered the valley. The wind coming off the ridges was sharp enough to sting her cheeks. Mira wrapped her arms around herself and searched for shelter. There was nothing but rock and dry earth until her eyes caught the shape of a lone pine tree leaning crooked beside the road. She stumbled toward it, the sand crunching beneath her boots. Kneeling by the tree, she clawed at the ground with her small hands, digging a shallow hollow the way her mother had shown her when they camped years ago. "The ground keeps you warmer," she murmured, her voice trembling. Maybe it still does." She curled up against the trunk, pressing her knees to her chest, her doll clutched tight beneath her chin. Tears slid down her dusty face, tracing thin, clean lines. The sun disappeared, completely swallowed by the earth. The valley fell into a dim blue-gray dusk. Above her, the sky was a black ocean scattered with cold stars. Mira shivered violently. Her thin dress did little against the creeping mountain chill. A branch snapped nearby. She jerked upright. Nothing, just shadows. Then came the long, lonely howl of a wolf. It rose from somewhere beyond the ridge, curling through the night air like smoke. Mira held her breath, her heart pounding loud enough for her to hear it. The world had gone still, too still, and every sound, every sigh of the wind felt alive. Fatigue settled over her, heavy as a blanket. She fought to stay awake, afraid that if she closed her eyes, something from the dark would come for her. But exhaustion dulled even fear. Somewhere in the blur between waking and dreaming, she thought she heard her mother's voice, soft and close, like a whisper carried on the wind. If you ever get lost, find a tree that faces the wind. It'll keep you safe. Mira opened her eyes halfway and looked up at the crooked pine. Its branches creaked above her, bending with the gusts, facing the direction of the wind as though shielding her. But only the cold answered her. She laid her cheek against the rough bark, murmured one last word that disappeared into the dark. Mama. And finally, the child drifted into sleep beneath the endless breathing silence of the wilderness. The plains stretched on under the moon, vast and colorless, holding her like a secret the world had forgotten. But she wasn't alone out there. Something was watching. The moon had climbed high, a pale shard above the emptiness. Mira woke to a sound, deep, rhythmic, heavy. At first, she thought it was thunder rolling across the valley again. But the noise didn't fade. It drew closer, steady as a heartbeat. Hoofbeats. Her eyes snapped open. She held her breath, the night pressing close around her. For a long moment, she could hear nothing but wind sliding over the grass. Then it came again. Slow, deliberate, the weight of something powerful moving through the dark. She pushed herself upright, back pressed to the trunk of the pine. Maybe it was him, she thought, panic tightening her chest. Maybe Eli came back. But even as fear coiled inside her, she knew those steps didn't sound like a wagon horse. They were too measured, too patient. As if whatever came through the mist feared nothing at all. Fog began to gather across the open ground, rising from the earth like breath from a sleeping giant. It thickened with every gust until the world itself seemed to dissolve. The moonlight turned the vapor to silver, and through that shifting veil a shape began to take form. A shadow, large and solid, moving with quiet certainty. Mira's heart thudded so loud she thought it might give her away. The shape grew clearer, a neck arched like a drawn bow, shoulders wide and strong, the glint of wet eyes catching the moonlight. A horse. It stepped forward, one hoof sinking softly into the sand. The creature was enormous, taller than any horse she had ever seen. Its coat shimmered, dark as obsidian. But when the light touched it, threads of indigo and violet rippled beneath the surface as though the night itself had wrapped around its body. Across its flank ran faint scars, old and healed, but deep marks of battles long past. Steam curled from its nostrils with every breath, ghostly against the cold air. There was no saddle, no bridle, not even the mark of a rope around its neck. It was wild, untamed. Mira tried to shrink back against the tree. The horse stopped only a few paces away, lowering its head slightly. Its eyes, amber burning faintly gold, found hers. They were not the eyes of a beast. They were calm, knowing. "Go away," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Please, just go." The stallion didn't move. Wind swept across the clearing again, stronger this time, pulling at her dress, tossing her hair into her face. The horse turned sideways, planting its hooves firmly, its broad body forming a wall between her and the wind. Its mane streamed like black silk in the moonlight. Mira blinked up at it, stunned. The creature was close enough that she could see each breath lift and fall from its chest. The tears came then, soft at first, then shaking her shoulders. It wasn't fear anymore. It was something deeper, something that broke loose when she realized she wasn't entirely alone. The horse tilted its head, its ears twitching at the sound. It took one slow step forward, its hoof silent on the sand. Mira froze. The stallion leaned closer, its breath warm against her face. It sniffed the air around her, a low rumble vibrating deep in its chest. Mira reached out, her hand trembling. "You're not going to leave me, are you?" For a long second, the creature didn't move. Then, almost imperceptibly, it lowered its head until its muzzle brushed her hand. The contact was soft, hesitant, yet deliberate. Warmth spread through her palm, a living pulse beneath coarse hair. Her fear fell away. The fog thinned, the moon brightened, and the shadows retreated. Under that ghostly light, a small girl and a wounded creature stood side by side, bound not by words, but by something older than either of them, recognition. But this creature wasn't a savior. It was a survivor. And the wilderness was about to test them both. The wind fell silent. Even the insects hushed. At the edge of the forest, wolves howled, a low, distant chorus that carried through the stillness. Mira clutched her doll tighter, her eyes on the stallion. "Don't go," she whispered. "Please." The horse did not go. It simply stood there, unmoving, its eyes glowing faintly gold beneath the silver moon, as though it had made a choice. The moon climbed higher, spreading its pale fire across the valley. Mira sat curled against the tree trunk, knees hugged to her chest. The stallion stood a few feet away, its ears flicking toward every faint rustle. The air was cold enough to burn her lungs when she breathed. She should have been terrified, but she wasn't. Not completely. There was something steady in the space between them, like a quiet promise holding the night at bay. Somewhere deeper in the forest, a twig snapped. Mira tensed. The horse's head lifted instantly, muscles tightening under its hide. Then came the howls. They echoed from the foothills. First, thin, hungry notes cutting through the quiet. Then others joined in, weaving a chorus that chilled the air. Wolves, a pack. And they were close. Mira's breath caught. She pressed herself against the tree, trembling. The stallion turned toward the sound, its nostrils flaring, breath steaming. Another howl answered, nearer this time. Eyes flickered in the dark, low to the ground, glinting gold. Mira counted at least 5 shapes moving through the brush. The horse shifted its stance, lowering its head slightly. The hair along its neck rose, shimmering like black fire. A growl rolled out of the shadows, followed by the soft crunch of paws over dirt. One wolf crept forward, shoulders hunched, yellow eyes locked on the girl. The stallion struck the ground with one hoof, a sound that cracked the silence like thunder. The wolves hesitated, then one darted forward, fast and silent. Mira screamed, but the horse moved first. It pivoted sharply, muscles coiling, and kicked out with both hind legs. The impact was a sharp, heavy thud. The attacking wolf yelped, tumbling into the brush. Dust and pine needles filled the air. Another wolf snarled, teeth flashing. The stallion spun, head high, and released a sound so loud it seemed to shake the ground. A high, wild trumpet that made Mira cover her ears. The remaining wolves froze. The leader crouched low, tail twitching. But even hunger has its limits. The stallion advanced a step, neck arched, eyes burning like coals. The pack faltered. Then, one by one, they retreated into the trees, their shapes melting back into shadow. The howls faded into the distance until only the wind remained. Mira slumped against the tree, tears streaming down her face. She couldn't tell whether she was crying from fear or relief. The stallion's sides heaved, its chest rising and falling. When it turned its head back toward her, the wild light in its eyes had dimmed. The look it gave her was gentle. "You saved me," Mira whispered. The horse gave a soft snort, lowering its head. She crawled forward on shaking knees until she stood close enough to touch its shoulder. The moonlight slid across the animal's coat, revealing the faint patterns of scars hidden under the hair, ghosts of the past written in silver. She reached out, hesitated, then pressed her palm against the warm hide. A tremor passed through the horse, but it didn't move away. For the first time since her mother's death, Mira didn't feel lost. She wasn't warm, she wasn't fed, but she was no longer alone. Exhaustion returned, but it carried no fear now. Mira sank to her knees, resting against the stallion's flank. Its body radiated warmth like a living fire. When Mira finally drifted into sleep, her small hand was still tangled in its mane. The valley was utterly silent. A few miles away, a man was moving through the forest. Jonas Reed, a former army scout, crouched low near a patch of damp soil. His lantern was hooded, its light dim. The ground told him a story, heavy hoofprints, deep and wide, alongside smaller ones. The bare footprints of a child. He touched the earth, frowning. "A child and a stallion," he murmured. The prints were fresh, made within the hour. Jonas rose, adjusting the rifle on his shoulder. Somewhere ahead, the wolves had gone silent. He followed the tracks until he reached the edge of the open clearing. There, under the light of the moon, he saw them. A young girl curled against the chest of a black horse. The stallion stood perfectly still, head lifted toward the forest, every muscle alert. Jonas froze, awe cutting through the breath in his throat. He had tracked wild horses all his life, had seen men die trying to break them, but nothing looked like this. "That ain't wild," he whispered to himself. "That's something else." He lowered his rifle, standing quietly at the tree line. For a long while he simply watched, unwilling to disturb what he was certain was a miracle. But he was wrong. It wasn't a miracle. It was a countdown to a war. Dawn had not yet found the ridge, but the darkness was thinning, the kind of hour when the world seems to hold its breath before it begins again. Fog slung itself low over the north slope of Shadow Creek, heavy as wet wool, and stitched with the dim jerk of lantern light. 3 points of amber bobbed across the spine of the hill, sometimes flaring with the quick spit of muzzle fire as the riders tested their guns. Eli Thorne rode ahead, a block of a man in a heavy hide coat that made his shoulders look like anvils. Sleeplessness greased his eyes with a violet sheen. Behind him came 2 hired men whose faces looked carved with a dull knife. Their Winchesters swung across their saddles. When the wind rushed up the slope, it pealed a raw moan off the treetops. Eli angled his head into it and rasped, "If the sheriff gets her, we hang. You find that brat before sunrise." They didn't ride to save, they rode to erase. Far below, where the fog eased into the mouth of the valley, Jonas Reed watched the ridge. The night gave him every sound, the ringing clack of shod hooves striking shale. He crouched, pressed his ear to the ground, and counted. 3 riders, he murmured, heavyweight, armed. He turned back toward the clearing. A small shape lay curled at the base of a crooked pine. The stallion stood with its head high, its body between the child and the trees. The moon made a pale island about them both. Jonas swallowed. "No time to admire miracles," he said to himself, and slid a cartridge into the breech until the lever clicked. He moved across the clearing, slow, open-palmed, speaking to the horse in the quiet nonsense voices men reserved for skittish animals and frightened children. The stallion watched him come and did not move. The girl slept on, her hand knotted in black mane. The first shot cracked the night like a glass pane thrown into a cold river. It hit the pine above Mira and ripped a mouthful of splinters across her hair. She woke with a choked cry. Before the sound finished leaving her throat, the black horse reared, 4 hooves cutting the moon, and came down in front of her, an iron curtain breathing fire that steamed in the cold. "Get down!" Jonas shouted. "They're shooting from the ridge." A second shot chunked into the dirt in front of the stallion's hooves. The horse swung a shoulder and widened itself until there was simply no way through it to the child. Jonas pivoted and fired twice. Quick sparks leaped from rock along the ridgeline. A lantern swung wild. One rider ducked back. Across the distance, Eli's voice knifed through the fog. "You think you can hide her from me, Reed? She's mine to deal with." "She's a child, Eli," Jonas called back, his voice as cold as a creek in February. "Yours to protect, not bury." For a beat, it seemed the whole ridge swallowed its noise. Then Eli's laugh crawled down the hill, low and raw, like a boot dragged across gravel. "That's where you're wrong." Jonas backed toward the girl. "Listen to me, little one," he said, keeping his eyes on the ridge. "When I say run, you run north. Don't you stop for anything." Mira looked from Jonas to the stallion, as if waiting for a judgment older than either man. The horse lowered its head, snorted, and touched its muzzle to her shoulder. A solemn benediction. "Run, girl. Go." She scrambled up the stallion's side, the way you climb the memory of something you trust. Awkward, quick, sure. Her fingers buried themselves in the thick dark of its mane. Gunfire stung the fog again, white tearing through grey. The stallion launched. Trees broke into stuttering streaks. Branches slapped past. The ground became a drum under their speed. Jonas sprinted after, cutting toward a deer path, firing once over his shoulder to make the men on the ridge think twice. "Stay in the creek bed," he yelled. "They can't track you there." Eli hauled his horse around the last switchback and pitched downhill, rage leaning his weight into the saddle. "Don't let him reach the ridge," he bellowed. "Move!" The night broke into a chase, their bodies little more than shadows, their voices spent coins cast into dark water. The stallion flew, sparks spat from stone when his hooves struck bare rock. Mira flattened her chest against his neck, her eyes slitted against the cold sting of wind and tears. Behind, Jonas's bay kept pace with a steady, ground-eating gallop. Every few seconds, Jonas threw a glance over his shoulder. Muzzle flashes needle-pricked the fog. Bullets tore dry grass heads at their ankles. Eli's voice skinned the night. "Don't let that damn horse get away." The deer path funneled into a shallow draw, and the draw into a ribbon of white stones where water ran in May and sulked the rest of the year. "Head for the creek," Jonas shouted. "It'll hide your trail." The stallion shouldered down into the dry bed, scattering pebbles bright as coins. The air cooled, and the tang of wet stone rose and steadied Mira's breath. The creek bent around a stand of alders and then cleaved toward a fault in the hillside. A narrow gap, dark as a mouth. Jonas rose in his stirrups. "Jump it!" The stallion gathered itself like a storm cloud pulled tight, then uncoiled. For a breath, there was no world, only air and falling light, the fierce quiet of flight. And then earth came up, sure and generous beneath them. Behind them, one of Eli's men misjudged the distance, wrenched back too late, and his horse folded. Rider and animal vanished into the black seam. His scream dropped like a stone and didn't bounce. "Keep moving," Eli snarled, whipping past the place where his man had disappeared. They ran on. The distance changed hands a dozen times, now favoring the chased, now the chasers. But with every minute, the stallion bled speed. A strange, subtle limp began to favor his front leg. After half an hour, the animal began to breathe in choked ropes of steam. Foam clung to the corners of his mouth. His stride shortened. On a patch of flat ground where the creek widened, he checked, half a stumble, half a question. Mira felt the tremor before she saw it, a hot shudder through the shoulder beneath her knee. They were losing, and Eli was closing in for the kill. Jonas swung down and set his lantern low. "Hold still, easy boy," he said. The way he said boy had more respect in it than most men gave to other men. The light found the stallion's shoulder. The skin was torn open along an old scar, just enough to weep. Blood seeped, slow and dark. "A bullet wound," Jonas muttered, his jaw hardening. "Months old." He touched the edges gently and felt the ridge of the healed track beneath. The circle in the scar was a size his memory dreaded. "Winchester. 44, he said, bitterness flat as a board in his voice. "Same as Eli carries." He caught Mira's eyes. They were wide, flaring at the idea that injuries could remember. "He shot this horse once," Jonas said, the pieces clicking into place with horrifying clarity. "Guess fate brought it back to him." This wasn't a random encounter in the woods. This was a reckoning. There was a place he could use to disappear, if he could find it in this snarl of hills. He lifted the lantern, turned a slow circle, and there, tucked into a rib of hillside, hung a collapsed door frame and a rusted sign that swung weakly on one bolt. "Red Hollow Mine." "Come on," he said. "Inside." The doorway rasped as if it hadn't spoken in years. Air from the mine slapped their cheeks, cool, iron-heavy, and older than men. They led the stallion as far as the main chamber. Jonas shrugged off his coat and threw it around the girl's shoulders. "He's hurt because of me," Mira whispered. "He's hurt because men like Eli don't know mercy," Jonas said, and didn't apologize for the sharp in his voice. Outside, the fog pressed its body against the hillside. Sound came muffled, a far-off tangle of hooves and shouts, a voice ordering torches lit. "Smoke them out if you have to." The words slid down the tunnel with a faint smell of pitch. Jonas checked his rifle. They were trapped. The chamber offered two outlets. The mouth they'd come in by, and another shaft, low and narrow, that ran back into the hill like the throat of a fox den. "They're close," he said. "Too damn close." Mira hugged her doll. The stallion turned his head toward the door, ears pricked. "We can't stay here," Jonas decided. "Follow the shaft." He took the lantern and eased into the narrower tunnel. The stallion ducked and shouldered through, trusting the light. The walls changed from flaked iron to a truer stone, damp and dark. Drips marked time in patient syllables. They had not gone far when a light approached them from the other direction. Low and steady, held in a hand that knew how to keep a flame in a draught. Jonas brought the rifle up, putting his body between Mira and whatever was coming. "Don't shoot, Jonas Reed," a woman's voice said, calm and worn smooth by use. "You'll scare the child." He knew the voice before the light lifted high enough to name the face. Rachel Whitlow stepped into the small circle their lamp made, her hair threaded with grey, her coat powdered with mine dust. "Rachel Whitlow?" Jonas asked, half relief and half disbelief. "What in the hell?" "I've been watching Eli's men from the ridge," she said. "I knew he'd drive someone down here sooner or later." Mira's tongue moved faster than her courage. You knew my mama." Rachel crouched until her eyes were level with the girl's. The lamplight warmed the lines in her face. "Sarah Dalton Thorne," she said softly. "I was her nurse. And her friend." She looked past Mira to Jonas, and the nurse became a witness. "I knew he hurt her," she said, her voice dropping to a steely whisper. "I've been waiting for proof." The abandoned mine wasn't a trap. It was a secret headquarters. And the real fight was just beginning. Rachel's eyes slid to the stallion. "What have we here?" She stood, set her lantern near the wound, and opened a leather satchel that smelled of alcohol and clean cloth. "Hold him steady," she told Jonas. Rachel tipped clear liquor over the torn edge. The stallion flinched, a low sound unspooling from his chest. Mira laid her hand against his shoulder blade and murmured, "It's okay, boy." "She's helping." Rachel's hands moved quickly, wrapping the shoulder in a tidy gauze bandage. "Sometimes the wild knows who needs saving better than we do," she said quietly. "You think this horse knows what he's doing?" Jonas asked. Rachel smiled without showing teeth. "He found her, didn't he? In a land full of monsters." The stallion's breath slowed. "This will do," Rachel said at last, "but you both need to move before dawn." "You know a way out?" Jonas asked. Rachel's look said she'd thought of little else since the first man in this county raised a hand where he shouldn't. "There's always a way out for those who tell the truth," she said. She led them along the main shaft to a corner where a piece of timber leaned against the wall. She tugged it aside. Behind it lay a crawl space of black, tight and mean. "Old miners punched a dog run years back," she explained. "It connects to the southern meadow. Half a mile on your belly in places, but it opens near Silver Ridge." Jonas snapped open his map. The line of the old ore vein bent exactly the way it needed to. He could feel the town at the other end. A pot of coffee cooling on a sheriff's desk, a place where a story could be told out loud. "Will he find us again?" Mira asked, her voice small. Rachel looked into her eyes, then turned her chin toward the dark throat of the tunnel. "Not if the truth gets there first." "Then we move at first light," Jonas said. "Fog rises early over the meadow," Rachel added. "It'll cover your trail." They doused most of the light. The stallion sank to his chest, conserving his strength. Mira slid down beside his shoulder, pressing her cheek against the wrapped wound. Jonas sat with his back to the rock, rifle across his lap. Rachel unstopped a small flask and handed it to him. "You ever think the land itself wants justice?" she asked. He tasted the cheap whiskey. "I think it remembers," he said. "Just takes its time." Rachel nodded, her eyes somewhere past the lantern. "Then maybe it sent that horse." Outside, the wind walked across the mine mouth. It sounded like the earth breathing, a warning and a lullaby both at once. Jonas watched the entrance until the dark beyond it began finally to pale. He let his eyes close for the length of a single heartbeat and opened them into a morning he meant to meet head-on. The first light of morning crept through the mouth of the mine like a secret finally told. Dust hung in the shaft, turning gold as it caught the sun. Jonas helped Mira to her feet and swung her up onto his horse. "The stallion needs to walk easy," he explained. "Stay close." They emerged from the secret tunnel into a world blanketed in silver mist. The grass was slick with dew. Ahead, a dirt track shimmered with moisture, winding toward the valley where Silver Ridge Town still slept beneath chimney smoke. The black stallion limped, yet his gait was steady, each step a stubborn defiance of pain. "Are we safe now?" Mira whispered. Jonas didn't turn. His voice came back over his shoulder, low and certain. "Almost. Just need to cross Red Hollow Bridge." The words were hardly out when the valley itself seemed to stir. Somewhere behind them, the soft sigh of wind was replaced by a harsher rhythm, the thunder of hooves. Dust began to rise at the far end of the trail, boiling red in the sunlight. Rachel stiffened, reins tightening in her hands. Jonas twisted in the saddle. "They're coming." The dust grew, spreading like smoke from a brush fire. Two riders broke through it. Eli Thorne rode in front, his face grey from sleeplessness, his long coat snapping in the wind. His shout carried across the distance. "You think you can take what's mine, Reed?" Jonas turned in the saddle, his expression unreadable. "She ain't yours, Eli. Never was." The exchange was enough. Both men kicked their horses forward. The chase reignited under the newborn sun. The valley erupted in motion, mud, wind, pounding heartbeats. Gunfire cracked. A bullet sliced through Jonas's sleeve. Another whizzed past Rachel's shoulder and split a pine trunk. Through it all, the stallion never faltered. His stride limped but did not yield. Ahead, the land dropped into a narrow ravine where a wooden bridge stretched over a shallow creek. Red Hollow Bridge. Its timbers were weathered, its planks bleached pale. Beyond it, the road curved into the open fields that led straight to Silver Ridge. "We make it to that bridge," Jonas said. "He's finished." Hope shimmered there, just half a mile away. But Eli didn't slow. He raised his revolver, spittle flying from his lips. "Hand over the girl, Reed. That horse is mine, too." The stallion was the first onto the bridge, the boards creaking under its weight. At the midpoint, Jonas wheeled his horse to face the oncoming riders. Rachel halted at the bridge's entrance, keeping Mira behind her, one hand gripping the old shotgun she carried. Eli reined in a few yards away, his own horse restless, ears pinned flat at the sight of the black stallion. The stallion's eyes gleamed like molten gold, fixed unblinking on Eli. The man swallowed, forcing a grin that didn't reach his eyes. Jonas's tone was calm, but every word struck like the click of a cocked hammer. "You've hunted beasts your whole life, Eli. Maybe it's time you faced one that hunts for something purer than you." Eli's grin widened, mocking. "This land ain't made for purity, Reed. It's made for the strong." "Then let's see which one the land remembers." For a moment the bridge was silent. Then Mira's voice split the stillness. "He killed my mama," she cried, stepping out from behind Rachel. "I saw him." Her voice rang through the canyon like a bell, echoing off stone and water, carrying across the open fields. In the distance, the people of Silver Ridge, miners, farmers, mothers, looked up. They heard the voice of the child and began to move toward it. Eli saw them too. His smirk faltered. Fear cracked his anger like ice over a pond. "You shut up, girl," he roared, yanking his revolver up. But the shot never came. Jonas lunged sideways, shoving the barrel away. The gun fired, the bullet tearing through his coat, grazing the muscle of his shoulder. The stallion screamed, a sound too wild to belong entirely to this world. It reared high, hooves cutting the sunlight, mane scattering gold sparks. The bridge trembled beneath its fury. Eli's horse shied, eyes rolling white, hooves skittering against the slick planks. Jonas staggered but kept his footing. He drove forward and kicked Eli's revolver from his hand. It spun once before falling through the slats into the churning creek below. Eli's remaining gunman fired in panic. The bullet ricocheted off a beam. Rachel's shotgun roared back, echoing across the canyon. The man jerked backward, hit in the shoulder and toppled from his saddle, crashing into the stony riverbank below. Mira stood, trembling but unflinching. Her eyes stayed on Eli. The black stallion moved before anyone else. It advanced one powerful stride, head low, nostrils flaring. Its hooves struck the wood with a thud, and the entire bridge shuddered. Eli's horse screamed, reared, and slipped. The man pitched sideways, striking the rail before crashing onto the planks. Jonas stepped forward, blood darkening his sleeve. He planted the muzzle of his rifle squarely against Eli's chest. "It's over." Eli's lips split into a crooked smile, blood gleaming between his teeth. "You think they'll believe a child?" he rasped. "And a broken man?" Jonas met his gaze without blinking. "No," he said. "They'll believe the truth." The sound of hooves approached again, but slower now, heavier. The kind of rhythm that belonged to law, not chaos. Sheriff Dawson appeared at the head of a small crowd, his badge catching the dawn light. Behind him came townsfolk, their faces grim. They had heard the girl's cry. The sheriff dismounted. "Drop the act, Thorne," he said. "Everyone heard you threaten the girl." Eli tried to rise. "She's lying," he hissed. "She's crazy, just like her mother was." Mira stepped forward, her chin trembling, her voice clear. "He killed Mama. He pushed her down the stairs when she tried to stop him from hurting me." A silence fell over the crowd, so complete that even the creek seemed to pause. Then came the low murmur of anger. Rachel moved beside the girl, her voice steady and sure. "I treated her mother. Those bruises didn't come from a fall." Jonas added quietly, "The wound on that horse proves it too. Eli shot him. Same gun, same hatred." Sheriff Dawson nodded once. Two deputies stepped forward, iron cuffs ready. The click of steel closing around Eli's wrists rang loud and final in the morning air. As they led him away, the crowd parted. The rising sun had burned off the fog, spilling honeyed light across the bridge. Mira stood alone in the center of the span, her hair lifting in the morning breeze. The stallion was beside her, his head bowed, breath curling white in the golden air. "It's over now," she whispered, stroking his neck. Jonas adjusted a makeshift bandage on his shoulder. "He ain't just a horse, is he?" Rachel shook her head slowly. "No, he's what's left when the land decides to fight back." Mira looked into the water below. The surface shimmered, reflecting her face beside the horses, child and creature, side by side, both shaped by the same wilderness. The stallion stood by the railing, his eyes turned toward the northern hills. Mira stepped to him, laid her hand over his heart. He whickered softly, the sound low and almost tender. Then, without waiting for command or farewell, he turned toward the creek, stepping off the bridge into the shallows. Water splashed around his hooves as he walked toward the tree line, sunlight tracing fire along his mane. Mira watched, tears gathering, but her lips curved in a quiet smile. "He's free," she whispered. The stallion paused once at the edge of the forest, the light crowning him in gold. He threw his head back and let out a single echoing call that rolled across the valley like thunder made of triumph and ghosts. Then he was gone, swallowed by the wild that had claimed him first and returned him last. On the bridge of Red Hollow, the morning light burned bright and clean. And for the first time in a long while, justice didn't feel borrowed. It felt earned. But a verdict is just a word. The story of the Shadow Stallion was far from over. 3 weeks later, the air in Silver Ridge carried a quieter kind of weight. The courthouse stood in the center of the square, a plain wooden building with flaking paint. Eli Thorne sat inside, chained to the rail, his once imposing frame sagging. Before the jury, Rachel Whitlow spoke with calm precision, recounting every bruise she had seen on Sarah Dalton Thorne's body. Jonas testified next, describing the chase and the gunfire. Then came Mira's words, halting but true. The courtroom stilled when she said, "He killed Mama. He thought no one would believe me." The silence that followed was deeper than any prayer. By noon, the verdict was read. Guilty. The sentence, death by hanging. No one cheered. When the gavel struck wood, the sound echoed through the square like a door closing on a long nightmare. Outside, the church bell began to ring, slow and solemn. Children were playing in the dust for the first time without fear. Rachel's house sat at the edge of town, where the fields of wildflowers began to roll out toward the horizon. Mira lived there now. She slept in a small cot near the window where she could see the stars. Her nightmares still came, but Rachel would be there whispering, "Hush now, child, you're safe." Days found a rhythm again. Rachel taught her to read, to mix herbs into medicine, and to sew. Jonas visited often, bringing flour or small treasures, a worn storybook, a silver hairbrush. Mira had started smiling again. Her hair grew long and soft, tied back with bits of ribbon. The shadows in her eyes faded, replaced by a calm light. A week after the trial, Jonas and Sheriff Dawson saddled up before dawn and led the black stallion into the valley one last time. They stopped at the foot of the northern ridge, a wild stretch of land untamed by fence or plough. Mist clung to the grass. Jonas stepped forward, his voice quiet. "Go on now," he said, brushing a hand along the stallion's neck. "You've earned your freedom." For a moment the creature stood still, then it lifted its head and breathed deep, the sound like wind rolling through stone canyons. Without another glance, it bolted forward, hooves flashing, mane burning silver in the morning sun. By the time the mist cleared, it was gone. From that day, the townsfolk began calling it the Shadow Stallion. Some said it was no ordinary horse, but the spirit of the valley itself, born from wind and vengeance. At night, travelers claimed they saw a massive dark shape on the northern hill watching the town. Its eyes, they said, glowed like amber lanterns flickering in the fog. When Mira heard those stories, she never looked afraid. She would only smile and tell Rachel, "He's not gone. He's just watching from where the world is wider." And whenever a gust of wind carried the faint echo of hoofbeats through the valley, she would place her hand over her heart and whisper, "I know you're there." The years moved quietly. Seasons turned, storms came and went, and life in Silver Ridge stitched itself together again. But every time the air shifted, when spring turned to summer or autumn to frost, he returned. Mira would be older each time. At 13, she was taller, her voice clearer. She'd sit on the porch at twilight, knees tucked under her chin, waiting for the first sign of him. He always came in silence, a ripple of movement at the tree line, a shadow darker than the night around it. The black stallion would stop by the birch tree near the creek where the moonlight fell softest. He never came closer on his own. He simply waited. Mira would rise and walk to him, barefoot through the damp grass. She never said a word. She didn't need to. When she reached him, she'd place her hand against his mane. He stood still each time, lowering his head until their foreheads nearly touched. His breath would mist against her skin, warm and real. Jonas saw it once from the trail above the house. He sat on his horse, watching the girl and the stallion in the half-light. "He could have left for good," he said to Rachel later, "but he keeps coming back." Rachel looked out the window, her eyes far away. Maybe he remembers the promise he made. When he left, it was always the same, quiet, unhurried. His hooves would sink deep into the wet grass, leaving prints that shimmered under the morning dew. Mira would find them at dawn, kneel beside them, and lay her hand gently in each one, as if tracing the memory of something sacred. Years passed. The little girl who once hid in the forest became a young woman, her hair long and sun-touched, her eyes still carrying the same fierce clarity of that night. One June evening, the sky burned gold over Shadow Creek. The wildflowers had bloomed high along the ridge. Mira climbed the northern hill alone, the flute of her mother hanging from a string around her neck. The valley below shimmered in the late light. She sat on the crest of the hill and raised the flute to her lips. The melody that drifted out was soft and clear, a song that seemed to belong to the wind itself. It was her mother's song, the one she used to hum by the fire. The tune rose and fell, curling through the grass. And when it faded, the world went still. Then, from beyond the next ridge, something moved. A figure, tall and dark, gleaming like oil under the sun, emerged from the haze. The stallion climbed the hill in silence, the golden light turning his coat to burnished copper. Mira's breath caught. She rose slowly, tears shining unshed in her eyes. "He wasn't lost," she whispered, her voice steady despite the tremor in her chest. "He was waiting." The horse lifted his head and let out a long, ringing call that rolled down the valley like thunder. The sound echoed off the mountains, wild and proud, filling the space between earth and sky. When it faded, he turned toward the woods, toward the same wild heart of the land that had forged him. The sun was sinking, painting the clouds in rose and amber. She didn't follow, she just watched. The stallion's silhouette moved through the mist, growing smaller, softer, until it dissolved completely. Mira stood there for a long time, the flute in her hand, her heart full but unbroken. The wind brushed through her hair, carrying the scent of the wild. She understood then what her mother had meant all along, that some spirits don't leave. They change shape, take new form, and linger where love once anchored them. From the hill, Mira turned one last time toward home. Rachel stood by the railing, a faint smile on her face. She only nodded once, a quiet blessing carried across the distance. Down by the fields, Jonas was crossing on horseback. He looked up, saw the girl standing against the sky, and tipped his hat. Some stories don't end, he said to himself, his voice lost to the wind. They just change shape. The last rays of sunlight spilled over the land, washing it in honeyed gold. Mira lifted the flute once more and played a single note, clear and pure, rising like a promise into the dusk. Somewhere far off, a faint echo answered, a sound like hooves on stone, like thunder fading into the sky. And in that moment, the girl, the land, and the spirit that had saved them all became one story, one legacy that would outlive fear, cruelty, and time itself. In the fading gold of evening, the shadow stallion lived on. Thank you for staying with us until the end of this story. We'd love to hear from you. Share your thoughts in the comments below and let us know your favorite part. If you enjoyed this journey, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more captivating stories like this one. And don't miss out. Hit the notification bell so you're always updated on our latest content. Your support truly means the world to us.